Good morning again, everyone. Welcome to Basecamp. If you weren't here last week, well, we're going to explain now why there's tents all over the stage and what we've been talking about. But we are talking about the church being much like a base camp, like the camp that all of the alpinists, the mountaineers go to before they attempt to get to the summit of a great mountain, like, for example, Mount Everest. And the base camp is the place where the hikers go or the climbers go, and they meet, they congregate, they form new relationships and bonds with each other. They're fed and nourished, they're challenged, they get acclimated, but then they push out to do what they're actually there to do. The base camp is never the goal. The base camp is just the stopping over point to get people to be able to do what they're actually called to do or what they actually dream of doing. And as the church is not the spot where we meet, which is the end-all, be-all. This is the stopping over point. This is so that we can meet here, we can gather here, we can congregate, be nurtured, nourished, challenged, and then we push out to do the thing that we're actually called to do, which at Grace, our mission is to strengthen families by making and growing highly committed disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And with that in mind, the church isn't just a place for worship, it is our base camp for ministry. So we launched into this theme last week, and we talked about how this is laying the groundwork for two financial campaigns. The first is our 2023 campaign, which is the annual gifts that we make or the gifts that we pledge to give for the coming year. Every year around this time, as we do our fall stewardship program, we talk about the importance of giving and sharing of our financial gifts so that the church can do its ministries. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit more going into receiving our pledges in a couple of weeks for the year 2023. The other campaign, the Basecamp campaign, for which all this is named, is about a capital campaign. And a capital campaign is an over and above and on top of campaign. And this Basecamp campaign will last 3 years. So we will be making commitments, financial pledges, 2 weeks from now, for a 3-year gift that we will give to gradually or maybe all at once, whatever is your preference, but we will be working towards a couple of goals. One goal, the most significant part of the campaign, is to pay off the debt on this building, on our base camp. You know, almost 20 years ago now, the congregation moved into this spot after they broke ground and started this church and the ministries that are a part of that we are all take part in. And it is time to close that chapter of paying for this land and this building. And we will also be talking about the second part, which is to make some necessary improvements to this space. It's also time to address some things that I think would enhance our worship and enhance the ways that we use this facility as our base camp. So if you didn't get a letter this past week, you'll be getting another one coming in the coming days. And we hope that you'll take a look at that and give some serious consideration to that. So with all that in mind, let me read to you our scripture passage this morning. This is from the 14th chapter of Mark. While Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table of the home of the man known as Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you. You can help them at any time you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, I wanted to tell you just a little bit more about the origins of this church and how this base camp came to be. And so we're going to turn our attention now to a short video where I did an interview the other day with Skip and Jenna Kitchens, who have been some of our longest and earliest members of this church. So for their perspective, let's take a listen.
Good morning, Grace family. I'm Skip Kitchens, and I'm here with my beautiful wife, Jenna. And we feel so blessed to have been a part of this church since the very beginning. And we've been asked to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened to get us to where we are now, especially with respect to our buildings. When we first got planted here, a church plant, we met all different places until such time as we had some capital campaigns and decided we need to have a church building for ourselves. And there's a lot of discussion of where to be, a lot of concerns about the finances, of course, and real estate issues, and a lot of things like that. And to help us to make our decision on where to go and how to proceed, our preacher at the time, Keith Elder, led us to say that we should just take a vision that says we want to be something beautiful for God. And from there, we did finally make our decisions as to what to do.
We chose the property because it was a place that our congregation could get away from their hustle and bustle of their lives and to unwind and worship God. Our building was built with nature in mind. We, from the way you walk in to the upstairs loft, you'll see nature everywhere inside our building. In the loft, the windows are designed with curves in them to mimic nature, and just like our lives, nature is never straight, it's always curves.
But I am glad to say that we went from about a $7.4 million debt hanging over us in about 2008, down to about $1.2 million in debt now. And it would be so wonderful if we can pay off this last debt that we have. I also think it would be very nice if we could continue to maintain the building we have, and especially make the worship center more inviting for people to want to come there to worship and to do other things.
And if you're standing in the sanctuary, you can look up at the trusses and you'll see 3 crosses supporting our roof, just like God supports us. Our church has changed over the years to meet our needs, but it's still something beautiful for God.
Thank you, Skip and Jenna. A story that came out of Basecamp at the base of Mount Everest in 2006 was a really powerful one. There was a climbing team, and among the team members was a guy named Lincoln Hall. Some of you may remember this story from back in '06. Lincoln Hall was a world-renowned alpinist from Australia. He had climbed anything and everything all over the world. It's really something when you make your living being a climber. Well, this is one of those guys, and on his trip to go to the summit of Mount Everest, he was successful. He made it all the way up to the top, and his climbing team was headed back down, and that's when things took a turn. Because the air is so thin up there, most climbers, or many climbers that actually reach the summit, carry oxygen tanks with them. But there are some, because they don't want to carry the extra weight, or they see themselves as sort of climbing purists, will not bring any extra oxygen to aid them in their climb. Well, that was the case for Lincoln Hall. He ended up having a shortness of breath, first of all, but then oxygen deprivation became a real problem. Edema set in, he became very disoriented, and then snow blindness followed. It was a brutal combination of events that led his team to really struggle with what to do next. They decided that they would try to help him. He was struggling to walk, and that became harder and harder, and eventually he just sat down in the snow and his legs wouldn't function anymore. The team called for help. They tried to find other ways to help him, but the reality was that they were too far up the mountain and the sun was starting to set in the sky. The team leader made the decision that they were going to have to leave him there on the mountain to die because there was no way to help him down. In fact, if they tried any longer, they would risk the whole team perishing from exposure from being up on the mountain overnight, which you just can't survive. So they went down the mountain and they got back to base camp and they told of this tragic set of circumstances that led to them leaving their fellow climber up on the mountain. Well, the next day was a day with favorable conditions, and another team set out to go up to the summit. It was their turn, it was their date. So they went up the mountain, and as they were nearing the summit, they came across the strangest of sights. It was a man sitting there cross-legged in a snowdrift, and he waved to them. This man wasn't wearing gloves. He had taken off of his jacket. He had taken off his shirt. And so a bare-chested man was waving at them and greeted them, "Good morning." They realized immediately that this was Lincoln Hall, and against all odds, he had survived the night on the mountain and was still able to communicate. Well, there's a man on that expedition, or on that particular tour, named Dan, and Dan looked at the situation and he said, can you walk? And Lincoln Hall said, I think so. And though he still wasn't quite right mentally, he was able to move his legs again. And Dan Mazer looked at the rest of his team and he said, we're going to have to rescue Lincoln Hall and take him down. So they helped him down, and over many, many hours and most of the rest of the day, they were able to help get him down to the bottom. And to this, for years afterwards, Lincoln Hall continued to survive. Saved his life that day. But a hard choice had to be made. You see, Dan Mazer and his team, if you think about what goes into a climb like that, it's significant. Years of training, tens of thousands of dollars of expense, application for a permit to be able to be one of the people to get to go to climb the mountain, the conditions being just right, taking 2 months of your life just to do this climb because it takes that much time to get to base camp, to climb the mountain, and to come down again. It was a sacrifice. It was a choice, and perhaps a hard choice for many people. And when Dan Mazer was interviewed shortly after saving Lincoln Hall's life, they said, how did you arrive at that choice? You were so close to the summit. You could have gotten there to fulfill your dreams, your goals. This is something that you had been planning for, and you stopped to help this other person who may or may not live through the event. He said the choice wasn't that hard, actually. The summit will be there tomorrow. Today, this man's life could be saved. When I think about that story, it takes me back to this story that I just read from Mark. You know, when Jesus says to the disciples who are critical of the woman, the poor you will always have with you, but she did this for me now. I hear those same words. The summit will be there tomorrow, but this man's life could be saved today. They're stories about sacrifice, really. I mean, think about what we know of the few details we have of this story from Mark. Jesus is at the home of a man named Simon the leper. His days are limited now. He's on a collision course with the crucifixion. Everything is starting to move faster and faster. The disciples have been following him and learning from him all along the way, and they are finally congregating in this one man's house. And all of a sudden, we don't have any other introduction, but this woman, all she's identified with is as a woman with an alabaster jar, comes into the house. She goes up to Jesus. She cracks recklessly this jar of perfume, and she pours this fragrant oil over Jesus' head. I mean, it has to be a significant amount of oil. The text tells us that the disciples are critical because they said this is a year's worth of wages, of expense of this oil. This gift is extravagant. It's over the top. It's truly sacrificial. I mean, what does a person have this much oil for anyway? Why would this woman have spent a year's worth of her income on that? Now, I am somebody who walks by the fragrance section at the department store, has a little allergy attack, and then looks at the price on these teeny tiny bottles and says, wow, that's a lot for that much. But I could never imagine a year's worth of wages on that kind of a purchase. But she had it. What was she going to do? Was she going to put on a little fragrance every day for the rest of her life and then some? Was she going to hope it gained in value, pass it on to her children? Was this something that she was saving to share with friends and divide it up for gifts, for a special occasion? Or, as some have wondered or speculated, is this something that she was saving for her own burial? In Jesus' time, it was pretty common. Before there was a lot of good techniques of preparing a body, and when the stench starts to set in, you cover them with oil. It was a special anointing for burial. It was something that was a common practice. But this was symbolic. This was extravagant. This was sacrificial when this woman does this for Jesus. She cracks the oil in the receptacle. It falls over Jesus' head, and you can only imagine what that must have been like. The oily concoction matted his hair to his forehead, dripped into his eyes, covering himself, rolling down his clothes onto the floor, into a puddle. The fragrance has to be spreading throughout all of the rooms of this tiny house, and everybody comes in to say, what has happened? Did this get spilled? What a tragic accident. Instead, they see Jesus with his eyes closed, receiving this incredible gift from this woman in preparation for his impending burial. And they're outraged. Why did you do this? This doesn't make sense. Except for the woman, it was the right thing. It was a gift for Jesus, and he received it as such. You know, this idea of doing things sacrificially is a different kind of distinction from just any kind of giving. I believe that when we talk about sacrificial giving, we're talking about giving that has the capacity to actually change us as the givers. You know, sometimes when we give because we hope that what we are giving to is impacted by the gift. But when we give sacrificially, that's certainly the case, but there's also the part of what it does in us. And in that sense, sacrificial giving is a spiritual practice. In fact, the word sacrifice shares the same root as the word sacred. So sacrificial giving is holy giving. It's sacred giving. Because it's about what God does to us in the process. Something transformative, something powerful, something that we alone could not do. That's why this story is such a powerful one. It looks reckless to so many, but in the eyes of Jesus, and based on the woman's response, this was the kind of gift of sacrifice and love that she wanted to make. So, as I mentioned, we're in this process right now of running two concurrent campaigns. The one is about what we give on a regular basis. And at the first service this morning, we had Chase and Doreen Fell join the church, a wonderful addition to our church family, but they went through the same kind of expectations around what membership looks like. Will you promise, I asked them, to offer your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness to the ministry of the church? And in that gifts segment, we talk about what that means. What does giving our gifts mean? It means that yes, we're giving the gift of our time, of course, and yes, we're giving the gifts of our talents, of course, but we're also talking about financial giving because as the church, the finances are what continue to propel the ministries of the congregation. The building, the lights, the staff, the ministries that we provide, the outreach that we do, anything that has a cost associated with it comes from what happens when we pass the offering plates, or what happens when we give electronically, or what happens when we auto-debit these gifts. That gift matters. And the historical precedent, the biblical precedent for that is called a tithe. It's a gift of 10% of our income, which is a lot. I mean, 10% sounds like a big number. It is a big number, and the reason why is because, not just because it's biblical, because we're supposed to feel it. We're supposed to notice it. It's not really a gift, and there's not really any sacrifice involved if it's just money off the top, money that won't be missed. Another latte kind of money, right? It's supposed to be the kind of gift that we feel because it's about what happens in us and about the belief of where that money goes and what that money is able to do when we share that combined with the gifts of others. So I'd like to ask you to begin the process of considering the spiritual act of praying and having some conversation at home about what your 2023 gift will look like. And as I do that, I also want to thank you for your generosity this year in 2022. And as we approach the fourth quarter of the year now, this is the time where we make up for a slower summer. That's just the cycle of things. It's just the way church finances work. But thank you in advance for your support and your generosity and your sacrificial giving. But this capital campaign, the Basecamp campaign, now that's called second mile giving. That's over and above and on top of giving. It's not an either or. You give to 2023, and then there's a second gift, which by nature makes the capital campaign gift a sacrificial gift. Because if you're already giving until you feel it, then this is more on top of that. But again, it's meant to be a short-term thing. It's spread out over 3 years. And the goal of this time is to make some necessary improvements here in our worship space and on our grounds, but more importantly, to pay off the debt that was part of that vision, to do something beautiful for God. As Jesus responded with the oil running down his face, he said, "This woman has done something beautiful to me." That was the theme when the church was built. That was the theme of the first capital campaign, and today we revisit that theme again because it's time to continue to do something beautiful for God. And this time is, let's do a few beautiful things, but let's wrap this puppy up. Let's be done. And then let's free up additional resources so we can continue on with the next vision and meet and greet and welcome new families to this place because of the growth of our community. It's a wonderful opportunity to celebrate and to take part in. It's to do something beautiful for God. Now, as we think about our gifts, I want you to know that Eleanor and I will be giving generously to this campaign. We tithe to Grace. We tithe to the church where she's employed. We are participating in a capital campaign that she's a part of at that church, and we're going to participate with thousands of dollars on this campaign as well because we believe in this. So I'm not saying that to, thump my chest at all. I'm saying that because I'm putting my money where my preaching is, right? This is important for us to do too. We're celebrating this. We're excited about this. We're giving sacrificially to this because we believe in this. And our gifts will not hold a candle to what some people in this church are able to do. And some people will be able to give far less, and that's why we talk about not equal giving, but equal sacrifice. That is a part of what we all must consider in this process. The other powerful part of sacrificial giving is not just what it does in us, not just where the money goes, but because when we give sacrificially, God does something with those resources as well. We believe that when this money is given in gratitude and in joy and lovingly, sacrificially to God, that God is going to do something powerful with the results as well. So I encourage you, again, to be in those conversations, to be in prayer at home, and ask the question, God, what are you calling us? What are you leading us? What are you challenging us to give? Lovingly, joyfully, and sacredly, sacrificially, to support the ministries of Grace, our church home, so that for years, decades, generations to come, we can continue to be a base camp to our community, to our families, to our world as kingdom builders for Jesus Christ. Will you pray with me?